This video is going to be weird. Why? Well, it is a common challenge in some colleges to take your college thesis and produce a video on it if you want to have any way of producing content. Like if you want to be a YouTuber, if you want to be producing things for television, if you want to be making educational content. There is a challenge in, let's see, this would have been probably my doctorate classes. But there's a problem. So I've never really discussed my education and where my education comes from and blah, blah, blah. So I did 6 years of college. I did 2 years in graphic design and design. I wanted to be a artistic director. I wanted to be the lead director. I wanted to work with artists directly to help and be the one that knows like fitting, alignment, color theory, psychology, that kind of stuff. So I studied mostly graphic design and lithography for my first 2 years and graduated with that. I then went on for another 2 years in writing, speech, and script design and public speaking. That was pretty awesome. I still have the but I try to be more formulaic and be more expressive and use proper terminology. I try to use the fundamentals of what I was taught in those 2 years. And finally, I come to my final 2 years, the 2 years where I did not finish school. That was the 2 years where my life fell apart in a manner of speaking. My life's fine, all things considered. But I studied philosophy, psychology again, and physics, specifically quantum theory and quantum physics, which means the challenge of producing a video where you take your thesis and try to produce it into a video from memory is not easy. So I wanted to discuss and produce a video on the theory that I proposed in college, which was the quantum infinite possibilities theorem, which was a variant of the Big Bang, how time and light anomalies occur that change the perception of humans and how we perceive the universe. My theory was grounded mostly in philosophy because philosophy was the main course that I was taking. I was very interested in understanding, mind you, I started in advertising, the greater thought process of people. I was minoring, obviously, in psychology, but I was also minoring in sociology at the time. So sociology is the study of the social dynamic of people. If I get on Twitter and things like that, there are ways that you can word yourself to, as Markiplier would put it, bait people. If you want to do clickbaiting, things like that, those are the kind of classes that you would take to understand, if you're a scriptwriter and you're just drafting a ton of scripts, having sociology as a background is really important because you want to be able to use contexting to know what narrow niche audience you're trying to target. And so that's essentially my entirety of college. College is, I don't have a script. I did reread my thesis last night. It is not aged well. I don't believe that everything I wrote is correct. Obviously, it's a philosophical question, something that can't be answered as simply. So, let's get into it, I guess. But before we get into it, just a quick clarification. If you're watching this video and you're interested in it, view this more as like a idea of who I am as a person. This is something that I want to put out there mainly because I find it interesting and fascinating. Going back to psychology, sociology, I'm interested in how people will perceive things and how people will feel about the things that I'm about to say. Number one, if you're religious and you feel like what I'm saying is in some way inflammatory to your beliefs, understand that I'm not trying to be inflammatory towards anybody's belief. Theology was a portion of my philosophy studies, and I was taught to be very careful with the zeitgeist of religion. I was taught to be very aware of how other people feel things. Obviously, with sociology comes the study of religion and recognizing that people in specific communities feel a certain way. So I'm not insulting your beliefs. I'm not stating you are wrong. I'm not saying that what I'm saying is not statement of factual information. In philosophy, there are a lot of just thought experiments, exploring things within your own mindscape and trying to rationalize them. And that was a very big and important part of the class that I took. So I want to start by saying thank you for watching. I hope you find this fascinating. I'm going to be editing this. There's going to be graphics and things like that as I attempt to explain things from memory. And if you agree with the things I say, that's great. Always do further research, learn more. I finished school in 2014, 2016. Uh, 2 of my years were online classes, and I mean, I was working 3 jobs, partially homeless for a while. So, this is not from a good point in my life. This is a part of my life that was very difficult. I was struggling a lot. I was soul searching a lot, looking for a lot of answers. I wasn't the man that I am today. I made a lot of mistakes. Um, I just did things that I wouldn't do today. I look back on those things, and I think a lot of people look back on their younger days and they say, wow, I can't believe I did that. So, space as humanity understands it is so much more than what we can perceive. You look out into space and you see the constellations, you see the stars, and you think to yourself, wow, if only I could reach out and touch those stars, or if I could go there, things could be different. But in reality, when you study things like quantum mechanics and you study how light actually functions and the grandness that is space, even if you were to leave Earth and astral project to another destination, it wouldn't be what you're looking at from Earth. Light itself takes time to reach Earth. When you take a snapshot of the stars, you are literally capturing the past. Because in the grandness of space, even at light speed, it's not fast enough. Sure, a proton or a particle could exist simultaneously in one place and another through the rules of quantum mechanics. The events of which we as humanity perceive these things is not instantaneous. Even just seeing the eyes or the light from your monitor hit your eyes and go to your brain takes time. It is imperceptible, but there is lag there. Recently, sidebar. Recently, James Webb Telescope took a picture of space, and what was really fascinating and what really pushed me to make this video and talk about these things was how a extremely clear photo of space was taken, and there was enough evidence within that photo by breaking down the colors and breaking down the concepts that are we recognize as quantum mechanics and space dust and things like that, and they were so old that we could not even comprehend how old they were. They were so old that within the modern framework of how we perceive the universe, these galaxies existed before that. So, insanity. So, to kind of break down what that means, light from a planet or a sun or a star, which I always refer to our sun as Sol in this context because it's its literal name, Sol-AR, solar. Um, so if there is a star or sun, and let's just use a theoretical number of 1 billion light years away, and you were to look up and see it pop into existence, you can then kind of use the time frame that you understand to guesstimate how old things are or how long light took to travel there, and you can use that to justify measurements of distance and justify measurements of, you know, time. But there are a lot of flaws in this kind of stuff, and one of those major flaws is refraction and gravitational bend. This is stuff that comes into quantum mechanics and space time, and how if you were to rocket off of Earth and fly away, the different effects of gravity throughout the universe, which, by the way, is not a physical anomaly, it is a density or force anomaly instead. Magnetic anomaly in some regards, depending, but that's typically a magnetic force. So essentially, what you're experiencing when you see that light come to us is there are planets, there are asteroids, there is space debris, there are magnetospheres, there are all kinds of things that exist in its way. When a snapshot is taken, you are taking a picture of a very smeared, distorted image of space. So that galaxy, even though you might have a representation of it 1 billion years ago, or space time, billion years, um, because of how the light has traveled, just because it's at a certain vector in space, and by vector I mean a singular point, um, that light has deviated. That light has very small infractions in it along its trajectory for you to then take a photo of the photons coming to you, correct? This means that within those bends and within those anomalies that occur within the light itself, time passes. It does take time for things to bend and curve and then go back straight, wrap around a planet for a period of time, and things like that, which means there is a variable of time in the theoretical 1 billion snapshot that you took. There could be a million-year difference, which in the scheme of space is finite. It does not matter. It's irrelevant to space. But to us as humans, as people perceiving things from space, that is a massive gap in time. Going even further back to things like the Big Bang, it's really interesting to conversate on where particles come from or why particles exist. But even more importantly is what happened after the Big Bang. You see, my theory when I wrote it in school was the concept of the chain reaction that occurred during the Big Bang was not in a singular vector. We had multiple points in space where this vector occurred. And this is not dimensional theory or bubble theory or anything like that. It was a mass that destroyed itself. All of the mass. If you had E equals mc squared, m equals all the mass in the universe were to detonate, I don't believe within my ideology that every single particle just detonated at once magically. No, I think more realistically is that the a fission or fusion based event, because fusion has to occur and fission has to occur, um, during that detonation had little pockets that detonated elsewhere and blew up. So within that concept came the idea that the universe that we perceive it as might be this bubble, right? So you were to stand here and look at the center of what we perceive as the center of the universe, we can then go so many billions of light years in the same direction forward and never reach an end because there is no end. Like, if the universe is ever growing, as we say, then the mass that detonated must have detonated constantly and continuously. There are detonations continuing throughout space and for eternity. There is no end. There is no road sign that says universe work ahead. There is no, things like that. There are just particles that continue to have a chain reaction. Firecrackers that you can purchase where you light one end and then they blow up along it. So they hit. So if you imagine one epicenter, boom, and then all those firecrackers go all over the place and then continue to explode. Boom, boom, and they keep going. That was essentially where my theory began. I think that was a great way to begin thinking about the universe in a different way. So many people think of it, again, with religion and God created it, but I always felt that the explanations of God can still exist within science. I don't like the idea of segregating science and religion. I think that's kind of silly. It's one of the reasons why the particle before the Big Bang is referred to as the God particle. And I'm writing a whole video game around the whole entire concept of the God particle. Anyways, also, this theory states that the God particle is what formed all molecules. So, be that as it is. Let's talk about that. I think the primordial mass that we recognize as the Big Bang was a mass of uniform or perfect harmony that was disrupted in some way. Think of how, like, carbon nanotubes have like perfect structures that are malleable, or nearly malleable, I believe. That suddenly is broken, and something occurs in this, what is perceived by many as a perfect structure, to deteriorate. And we recognize this deterioration with the idea of time, or at least that's how I explained it within myself, because that's where the point of infinite possibilities occur. Due to the infinite structure that is the God particle of the Big Bang, this particle must have been affected by time. We recognize that many things are constantly affected by time. We can observe time within our real life. So it's not impractical to me to think that over the course of billions, trillions, quadrillions, decadodillion of years, that some form of infinite probability just went, and now we have this process of breakdown where other particles are changing along with it. And with that came the fission or fusion event, where the molecular structure that was perfect broke down and began anew. Within this theory kind of comes many questions that I tried to answer. Things like white holes and black holes, and how light can't escape a black hole, and how a white hole is an explosion because its mass is too dense and it can't retain everything anymore. The molecular structure within a black hole must be that of a God particle within my perception, because it can't just continue to compress. Obviously, you have Hawking radiation, and the Hawking radiation within itself could be perceived as some form of this early primordial universe beginning where the largest black hole may have occurred, and that was the God particle. It went and blew up, essentially, creating what we perceive as the universe. In many regards, what we perceive as the Big Bang may not have been the beginning of the universe, but just one of the chain reactions along a trillion, billion, quadrillion, dodecadillion long chain explosion event that is continuing to this day. It could be why there's background radiation that we recognize to this day. That background radiation could be the decaying event of Hawking radiation of the original black hole that detonated. We also recognize that within the center of every galaxy is a black hole or that is a idea that is commonly perceived. It is constantly absorbing in everything, and I believe that there is some form of uniformity that must take place in order for the perfect Big Bang to exist. And within the rules of infinite possibility, it can exist for a period of time until it no longer does. There might be a scrap of some foreign molecule or foreign structure that we don't understand that acts as an ignition, and it causes the chain reaction to then detonate and go off. So that was pretty much the beginning of my thesis, the idea of how the universe began and kind of quantifying things like how we perceive light and beginning to break down perception as people, as we would be able to turn on the television and have something on TV like Nova or whatever, begin to kind of elaborate on what space is and how we perceive space. I mean, space has been so important for many, many, many histories of life, and I use the term histories because there are different cultures, there are different histories in time. There are histories that humanity might not fully grasp. I went on in my paper to talk about the start of life. Life itself is one of those things where so many people, again, I don't want to be insulting to religion or anything like that. That was never my intention. But I believe that there is a much more rational explanation or some form of rational ideation that can take place. And that was just that chemistry just finds a way. And in many ways, life finds a way. And what I mean by this is if we have some form of primordial particle that exists within the center of black holes or around black holes, and they detonate, and there's this constant change in radiation, and all these different molecules and particles and protons and neutrons and electrons are being ripped apart, and quarks are being pulled apart, and things are being reconstructed in so many different ways. Who's to say that something like a basic protein couldn't just be formed within the infinite expanse at some point? Because of the rule of infinite possibility or infinite probability, in this regard, probability, alien life, human life, all life has to exist at some point. It can't not exist and exist. We can't be the only ones because there's so much more than us. We can see within our daily lives many species, many different plants, animals, and fish, and different examples of life, even here on Earth. To justify yourself in stating that there is no such thing as alien life because you want to be some form of narcissist in the universe doesn't really cohesively make sense in science when you look at things through a lens of possibilities, infinites, and, well, my theory on how the universe came to be. So once again, I'm stating that this was just me in college. This was just a paper that I wrote. These aren't things that should be perceived as fact. They are philosophical ideas, things for people to think about, things for people to explore the idea of. It's theoretical. It's just an idea that is created within a college student mind during philosophy, psychology, and sociology. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a doctor in this. I moved around subjects in school so often that nothing really made sense. In fact, when I finished school, it was considered a general studies, and if I were to have my doctorate today, it would have been a general studies doctorate. It would not have been anything special, and most companies won't even recognize it as special. I had a really cool professor in college who was really fun about different topics, and when reading some of my rough drafts that were roughly 32 pages long at the time, he said it would be really interesting for me to expound upon things like alien races, interdimensional transpermeation, which was a conspiracy theory at the time, and different things like that. So I did, and I want to kind of get into some of the things that I talked about in the paper here. Again, these are just ideas. I don't want people running amok with these, so enjoy the ideas. If you want to believe these, I think that's healthy, but understand that science is ever changing and you should keep up with it. In the world of infinite possibilities, or the concept of infinite possibilities, we have several things that have been discussed. Um, in the beginning, we had a person taking a photograph, and I then related that to James Webb. And I talked about how light itself travels through space and is perceived differently. We are essentially looking up into space and directly looking at the past because that light is still traveling to us from billions of years ago. This is how we take pictures of the universe in concepts of the past. It's why the only true way to really understand the universe is to leave Earth and travel space as it is. And even then, when in space, we can only travel and experience things that we interact with directly, right? We can't assume anything based on photographs of things across space because what you're looking at in that photograph itself is past. It's not occurring right now. If you were to get into a rocket ship and fly to the sun and visit a planet of the sun that was 1 billion light years away, in an instant, it would be completely different than the photograph taken on Earth. You would not see anything similar to what we're seeing now. That sun, that galaxy, might not even be there. In all likelihood, because in space we are moving constantly, the likelihood of it being there is very slim. Um, so that was a whole thing that I hopefully you understand. So let's move forward into the God particle concept that I wrote about and how the God particle became everything. If there is infinite possibility, there is a sense of randomness. Of course, when I say randomness, I mean literal randomness. Things just tried their best to be cohesive in different environments. It's important to understand is when the Big Bang occurred, there was heat, radiation, all these different types of events taking place within it. There could have been a compound created that resulted in a fission reaction that later became a sun. These are things that we can, in many ways, recognize that did occur. Many of the gases that would then ignite to become suns, suns have denser are very dense and they begin to create galaxies and have planets and planetoids and moons and asteroids, and things begin to collide and smash into each other and blah blah blah. So, if we take the God particle concept and just state there is a certain formulaic concept that allows what we perceive as life to exist, there could be many others, of course, then we can understand how water became to be, earth became to be, plants became to be, and how structures became. There was just a working set of molecules that eventually adapted itself into functioning things as they were. I never expounded on things like consciousness, as I always felt like expounding on something like consciousness would be slightly disrespectful and out of my wheelhouse. I always felt like that was something that is more for spirituality and faith to kind of discuss. Sure, there are people who argue that consciousness is just programming, essentially, like different molecules reacting in certain ways that allow us to function, symbiotic relationships of, cells and things like that. But If that's how you feel, that's fine. If you believe we are born in the image of God, that's perfectly fine as well. I don't want this video to be anything where I come across as stepping on any. So next we move into, now that we have a grasp of how life may have come to be, an idea of it, we get into different concepts such as spermiation and what is spermiation. So essentially, spermiation is the idea that one molecule that eventually became a virus, that eventually became this, that eventually became that, structured a DNA or began to be symbiotic in some way and form what we perceive as life, didn't only exist here, because going all the way back, we talk about the firecracker effect. If that were to be true, then within the environments of infinite or possibilities, that would have occurred again. Maybe not identically, but it would have occurred again and again and again. And when we talk about Earth and we stand on it and we look up into space, again, you are looking at the past. You are not looking at the present. So, in the concept of infinite possibilities, it is that if we were to be some form of omnipotence or be able to move within the universe at a rate that is immediate, where we could perfectly explore and perfectly understand other planetoids and planets, and oh, that one looks really interesting in the past, let's go visit that, and we had the perfect calculations to pop to it immediately, we would more than likely find evidence of life. It does not mean intelligent life. It does not mean, animals. It does not mean plants. But over a period of time, it is thought that we would. Maybe not in our universe or what we perceive as our universe, but within a different universe. So essentially, what I was trying to explain was that under the guise of infinite probability and infinite possibility, we are not special. And I don't know why, but during that point in my life, that was something that was like really important to me, that we weren't special, that there are alien life, there is a chance of one day meeting them. Because although time from our perspective is slow, in the grand scheme of space, there could be alien life that has moved between planets already. There is a species that has moved from one planet to another. Unless you disagree, which is fine, because this is a theory. That's how theories work. But yeah. So, then we get into like quantum entanglement and things like that, and how I believed, I don't currently really believe this, but we have recognized that you could entangle one particle to another and they react identically. I don't know if that has been 100% proven without a doubt, but if that is true, if you were to perfectly capture every single particle that is entangled, you in theory could entangle them and move between two different planes of existence simultaneously. So that was always like, is this the answer to wormholes, etc., which was always super interesting. There was also another portion of my paper where I was talking about photonic uh, radial thrust theory, if I remember correctly. I mean, mind you, this is 6 years ago. Essentially, it was if we could somehow make a perfect lens, like a perfect mirror that was bent in a specific way, and we were able to perfectly capture all of the light and make some form of sail that worked on lights. And this is a thing, ion sails are a real thing. And we were able to then convert light energy into thrust or physical energy or kinetic energy. We could then have this beam of light into space from Earth, right? So you just have this point on Earth where all the light just convexes perfectly and shoots off into space. And if it was like a laser, which yes, there is deviation in the light trail of lasers, blah blah blah, the light would only accelerate to a certain point, and then it would. That's light. Light's hard. Light's extremely difficult to understand. You could essentially capture that energy and convert it to kinetic energy as long as you could displace the heat. Blah 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 blah. Obviously, we're talking about frictionless movement and things like that, but I talked about how there are different theoretical concepts that you could utilize to make movement in a vacuum, essentially. Obviously, space can't be a perfect vacuum because things have to exist. There can be perfect vacuums, but not everywhere is. And to perfectly triangulate a light beam with something in the middle of it collecting all of the light against its rear to move forward in a perfect vacuum would be insane. It would be a hell of an undertaking. Yeah, I guess that means we need to get into the ending of my paper. Philosophy was the overarching theme. I wanted the entirety of it to be a thought experiment, more in the realm of here is actual science and here are some thought experience or experiments within it. And then I wanted to kind of take I wasn't as sensitive to theology at this point in my life. I was still kind of all over the place. I'm a lot more sensitive to it now. Um, but I wanted people to question what they believed by providing that psychological edging that was required before me to get a passing grade in this class. Uh, well, this graduating class. Um, so yeah, I had to incorporate psychology into it, and making you realize that time as we perceive it is so small. Like 100 years in your relative perspective is massive, but to the relative perspective of the universe is so minor that nothing has happened. Um, there's a probe in space. I think it's Gemini, Cassini. I forget. Man, I've been out of this for a long time. But they said that after it passed Uranus, it'll be another 30,000 years before it leaves our solar system. And people can't understand that because our perspective of the human race, as in modern times, began at the death of Christ because religion is important to humanity, or whatever your people believe it to be. Obviously, different places believe it to be different times. I believe North Korea thinks it's like the 1920s or something. I don't know if that's correct, but regardless, it's so far in the future that we might not even exist. Like humanity itself could eradicate itself before the first man-made object leaves our solar system. And once it leaves our solar system, it has billions and billions of years before it can even reach what humanity perceives as the center of our universe, where we've never seen beyond, essentially. It will take so long that humanity will never see it. In fact, it would take so many generations of humanity to get into space and begin to follow it that even if we did, the odds are that we would never even escape our own solar system. I mean, it's insane to think that just within our mortal coil and how we are fundamentally made, that if we were to try to leave, we probably wouldn't make it. And that experiment and that thought experiment of like, okay, so we're not doomed, we can save the earth, and this is, going into like my youthful sense of thinking of, don't litter, clean things up, let's stop using oil, which in many ways I still believe to this day. I think many people do. Find green energy, save the oceans, make more lakes, stock them with fish, We need more fresh water, that kind of stuff. Stop war, obviously. Yeah, I always thought that was super fascinating. And when you take everything that I've stated into perspective and you have this psychological thought process of like, okay, when I look into space, I'm looking at the past. I will never understand the universe in the present moment. I physically cannot, outside of maybe the moon, maybe some of our close terrestrial objects, interterrestrial objects technically, is insanity. You would literally have to instantaneously appear on a different point in space, and only then could you recognize and study things for what they are now, because time and light take forever to reach us. Then we have a breakdown of my theory of the Big Bang, which God particle makes everything, blah blah blah, fusion, fission, boom, bangies, things happen, boom, we have universes, chain events. What we perceive as the center of the universe might not be the center of the universe. Space is infinite, blah blah blah, or perceptively infinite. Aliens definitely exist within my realm of thought and how this is all explained. And we had some theoretical engineering, and then it comes to sociology, which was mainly just my prodding of religion and getting people to look at things from a different angle, which I think was the majority of my loss of points. And then my other majority loss of points, if I'm not mistaken, was also just not having enough sociology within the structure of the entirety of my paper. They wanted me to do things like reference social groups and social experiments where they were asking people about space and things like that. They wanted me to get more outside perspective, but at this time there really wasn't a lot of outside perspective. I mean, I tried to do stuff with like the spermiation and aliens and discuss like conspiracy theories and how they could possibly be interpreted as real within an actual theory that grounded those conspiracies into them in a way that was functional and potentially scientifically accurate, and then allow the philosophy to kind of be the greater thought process there of, I think there are aliens, therefore there are, just like the I think, therefore I am kind of concept, but I don't think I really landed on 2 feet when I did that, so that was a struggling point. And that is essentially everything I wrote in my thesis. I hope this video was interesting. I hope you walk away thinking about things maybe differently. And I want to reiterate again, this is not inflammatory, this is not insultory, this is just something I wrote in college. It is a work experiment as somebody who wants to make content to do this off the cuff based on memory of something I did 6 years ago, and then edited it into something that is coherent and makes sense. So hopefully I did that right. Let me know what you think down below. Of course, subscribe if you are new. This isn't regular content, of course, but that's just what it was. So there are all these different experiments that people tell you to do online, and I kind of want to just try them out. And this was one of the ones that I read, and I was like, that's interesting because I'm weird. I did a lot of weird stuff. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Still don't. But hey, if you enjoyed the video though, hit the like button. I'll see you guys in the next video.